Our ancient sacred text today is from the book of Acts, chapter 1, verses 6 to 14. While meeting together, they asked, "Has the time come, Rabbi? Are you going to restore sovereignty to Israel?" Jesus replied, "It's not for you to know times or dates that Abba, God, has decided. You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you. Then you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, throughout Judea and Samaria, and even to the ends of the earth." Having said this, Jesus was lifted up in a cloud before their eyes and taken from their sight. They were still gazing up into the heavens when two messengers dressed in white stood beside them. "You Galileans, why are you standing here looking up at the skies?" they asked. "Jesus, who has been taken from you, this same Jesus will return in the very same way you watched him go into the heavens." The apostles returned to Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives, a mere Sabbath's walk away. Entering the city, they came to the upstairs room where they were staying: Peter, John, James and Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew and Matthew, and James, Ben Alphaeus, Simon, a member of the Zealot sect, and Judah, ben Jacob. Also in their company were some of the women who followed Jesus, his mother Mary, and some of Jesus' sisters and brothers. With one mind, they devoted themselves to constant prayer. Santa Sabiduría, Santa Palabra.
We weren't prepared for the hate. These are the words that shook me to my core this past week. On Wednesday, I had the opportunity to attend actually the Levin Community Land and Housing Coalition strategy team meeting. This is a gathering of folks who are kind of hold the bird's eye view of the Land and Housing Coalition work and are accompanying both the learning cohorts, like our learning cohort that's moving through the sacred organizing curriculum, and they're accompanying communities across the Tri-County region to develop affordable housing on their land. And this was the words of Jake Bailey, who's the organizer for Washington County. And he and Levita have been accompanying Aloha UMC, United Methodist Church, in developing, or not even developing, in approaching the idea of having affordable housing on their land. And what happened was the congregation was getting ready to do some deep canvassing, which is to say having deep conversations about what it means to be in community with members of their neighborhood and sharing with them their ideas about developing housing. But they were going to be doing that, and before they were able to start approaching the community, word got out. And flyers, the whole neighborhood was flyered with really hateful rhetoric about this potential. There was a flyer that highlighted, well, you can probably name it, but crime, trash, criminals, drugs, the inflammatory things that gets people hot. And it said that the church is doing this work and not even involving the neighborhood in it, which of course they had not yet even been able to start. And there's no contract yet. The church has since held 2 meetings. Those meetings have been tense, they've been painful, they've been charged, they've been racially charged, and the church has received death threats. And as Jake put it, we weren't prepared for this kind of hate that would come at us. We'll come back to talking about them, but this Easter season, we have been talking a lot about germination. And I've been, thinking about all the things that it takes for a seed to germinate in the soil. The soil has to have the right nutrients present. It needs to be the right temperature, have the right amount of moisture. The light needs even though it's underground, there needs to be extending light. There needs to be the right amount of water. And that particular seed needs to be the right depth, beneath the soil. It can't be too shallow, can't be too deep. And of course, we've been using this as a metaphor too for thinking about community. What are the conditions for community health and for community growth, for community flourishing? Trust, connection, creativity, curiosity, care, love. And I think about this story about what's been happening at Aloha UMC, and actually how it's a microcosm of what's been happening in our world, not just our country, the political polarization that's been taking place not so recently anymore, for a long time. And that somehow we lose sight of each other. We lose sight of each other's humanity, each other's dignity, when we externalize the problems that we face as somebody else's problems, as unhuman, right? Trash, crime, somebody else's problem. That's not mine. We dehumanize each other. And I wonder at Rumi's poem, and I apologize I did not update. It's not a modern sacred text, it's ancient. Rumi's poem, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. I'll meet you there. And it's actually quite delicate, this sustaining way of being in community. I'll meet you there. We can move from a rich compost of regeneration to a toxic sludge in an instant if we aren't paying attention to the stories we're telling ourselves, to the stories that we're telling each other. Crime, trash, criminals, drugs, not children. Nourishment, addiction, support, home. Instead of relationships, we have projections, imagined stories about each other that we tell ourselves to make ourselves feel more comfortable, to relinquish ourselves of responsibility. These kinds of projections, of course, are human, and they happen all the time in our relationships with family, coworkers, partners, friends, and as we see in this example, of complete strangers. When we begin to see and name our projections, though, we can begin to shift our reality. You can even see it among the disciples in this text. They're asking questions. They have a story already about how things were supposed to go. Lord, is this the time that you bring the kingdom to Israel? But the angel, actually, Jesus doesn't even answer that question. He's just like, okay, up to heaven in a cloud. An angel comes down and the angel says, why are you still standing there looking up toward heaven? Their projection was the belief, the story that Jesus was a physical Messiah for this world, meant to bring back the kingdom in the way that David, the ruler of Israel, did. It was an assumption. It was also about their fear. Maybe they couldn't lead if Jesus isn't there. But the moment that they turned from that story, from gazing up high in the clouds, and instead went back to Jerusalem to be with one another, to pray, to reflect in that upstairs room, that's the moment that they took accountability, that they took ownership, that they began to plan, to prepare, to pray. This is the moment that their projection was wiped away. It's the moment that they freed themselves to try something different. So I think what's important, one of the things that's important about the story of the ascension is what happens after the ascension in that upper room. This is the moment where the community of Jesus followers begins to realize that the moment is now. It's for them to lead. And this requires that they know how to be in community together. Actually, immediately following this text, kind of cool, the rest of the chapter is about them electing a 12th disciple, because Judas was no longer a disciple anymore. So they were the 11. It tells the story. There are two people, and they're like organizing, figuring it out, and they voted, and they elected a 12th. It's also a beautiful example of community, women and men together as leaders. Really rare for this time. And there's a kind of peace in this image of the upper room, of prayer together. A kind of groundedness is implied. And I think it's that kind of groundedness that's needed to identify our projections, to identify our assumptions and our stories. What am I making up, maybe, that's happening here? What are the questions that I need to ask to get at the truth? What are the feelings that I have that I need to share with someone to get at the truth? Meet me at that field between right doing and wrongdoing. And so, of course, this applies to us as well. In our personal lives, our lives here together at Levin and at Salt and Light. What stories do we hold dear that are just that are stories, that might be projections? And when we pull back the veil in prayer and in groundedness, what truths can we find together? Maybe these are the questions to ask ourselves. What is the responsibility I'm willing to take for the thing that I'm concerned about? What is the truth I need to communicate about the thing that I'm concerned about? How do we want to be together? What do we want to create together? Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. I wonder what our world would look like, what Aloha UMC, their experience would be looking like if all of us moved with an inner field within us where there is no each other, where there is always seeking one another out in that field beyond right doing and wrongdoing. At a certain point, it almost doesn't matter. It matters, but it almost doesn't matter who did the thing, what happened, how it happened, who did what. The thing is here. What matters is now what? Here in our upper room. Our leader was crucified, then came back, but now is gone again. Now what? How do we want to be together? What do we want to create together? It begins with accountability. It begins with ownership. It begins with belonging. It begins with care. Out beyond the ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. Will you join me? And so, of course, this part of being in this community together is our practice of one-to-one conversations. Now, this is a practice that we've held for a long time of taking time in this community to turn to one another and ask each other questions that matter, to try to strip away those stories, strip away those projections, and show up truly for one another. This is not a practice that's for everyone. It's not a practice for everyone every day. And so if it's not a practice for you today, feel free to take care of yourself. There's coffee, there's tea, there's a beautiful day to take a walk. But for the rest of us, I also invite us into that conversation. And the question that I offer for you today to find one person for the next 10 minutes is, what story are you letting go of today? What story are you letting go of today? So we will take 10 minutes and I will request for you all to come back at that time. Thanks.